So we have some time for some discussion, questions before lunch, and no, lunch will not be served until we've had the discussion. So don't try to sneak out, students of Dr. Putz.
Yeah, don't you dare.
And we've tried to, insofar as we can, kind of like equally share the questions between our two speakers. And we welcome especially questions from students. But I saw a question right here. Yeah.
Thank you. In my day job, I fight young Earth creationists, and I've often been told by them that there's an unbridgeable gap between humans and all other created organisms. Now, I know that neither of you would say, okay, we're going to allow primates into the proto-religiosity club, but then there's an unbridgeable gap between primates and all others. So I'm just wondering how theologically you would deal with, you would bring into the continuum proto-religiosity without probably saying that the first single-celled eukaryotes have a proto-religiosity. Just how do you deal with the continuum?
So the most important aspect here is the scotistic idea of God. And I think of this universe as being released into a free evolutionary process. Now, if you think about evolution and what is evolving, it is the cosmos, it is a cosmic story. And I'm a dual aspect monist. In other words, I believe that spirit and matter always go together. That does not mean that an electron has self-consciousness, but it means that in that process of evolution, cosmic evolution, eventually matter-spirit can reach a point where that can, and I shy back from the term emerge. It's not a question of emergent as much as that that the cosmos can indeed become self-conscious or conscious of itself. So the way I see it is that God puts out a beacon and we can eventually pick that up or not. And with that capacity to pick up that beacon, what comes also is, as we've seen in Professor Hodd's talk, the capacity for freedom. Once you have freedom, you can reject to pick up the phone. Or you can just say, well, it's ringing in my head, but it's not real. So here's another scotch. Right? That's a possibility. So I would actually say that in this process, it's not only the primates. I mean, you saw that there was self-recognition in other animals as well, and I would argue you would find the same thing in those animals as well. It's actually a convergent evolutionary process. It starts from different points, from the same point of view, but different start, right? Different material start, but moves into the same function. So I would actually say that there is a directionality in evolution, but it's a metaphysical claim or even a theological claim and not a scientific claim. Though you might find that actually, and I think the data is in, I say, that you see scientific correlates to that degree, that there is a movement towards self-consciousness. Does that answer?
Do you want me to answer it as well? Yeah, I mean, I think that there's the idea that there's this radical split between humans and everything else is a mistake. So, and this is what we're both trying to challenge in different ways. Now, I might not go quite as far as Dr. Putz has done in terms of some of the conclusions that he reaches in terms of a theory of mind in relation, because I think that's still it's still debatable within the scientific community. But I think it's certainly an option on the table. So in other words, I think that the suggestive experiments that have been done, certainly by Duval, believes that they are convincing. Other scientists believe they're not so convincing. So I would say there's a slight ambiguity in that. But I also think the idea of wonder that comes up, that he's mentioned, the capacity for wonder, in other words, is a prerequisite for religious belief or even philosophical belief. So that some of the prerequisites that we find in the human societies, human communities, are beginning to emerge in, like you say, convergent evolution in other social animals. When it comes to self-recognition, there is a form of mirror recognition in dogs, for example, through their smell, sense of smell, and they found that actually they recognise through smell rather than through sight. So there's a self-recognition through smell, very strong self-recognition. So we have to sort of almost get ourselves into the mind of the other animal in order to recognise what's important for them. And I think that ethologists like Mark Beckhoff and others have done this extremely successfully. They have met with a certain amount of skepticism amongst other scientists who are cautious about anthropomorphizing. But of course, we anthropomorphize about God, you know. So I say that it's a heuristic tool to help us understand what other animals are like, just as we use anthropological language about God in order to understand what God is like. But God isn't a human being. He's not a being like us. But in order to understand God, we use this language to help us realize, you know, more what the God-human relation is about. So therefore, in order to understand other animals, let's take a few risks and try and see, well, what if this goes on, and then what do we discover in the light of that? Now, of course, we have to admit that we may be wrong. So in that sense, the science is still open-ended and open-textured, but I think it becomes extremely interesting theologically when we take on board some of the discoveries that are being made. And we need to recognize there are still scientific debates, but I think to resist this in the name of theology is not necessarily desirable. I mean, when you go back to the biblical story, think of Balaam the ass. Balaam and the ass had agency in that narrative. We tend to forget these kinds of stories. So that it is in the classical and the theological tradition as well. It's just we haven't always recognised its significance.
Hello. So my question actually is, like, Dr. Putz, you were talking towards the end about how, like, animals have like a sort of proto-religion rather than actual religious sense, like with, like, you know, limited language facilities and all that. My question is, at what point would we say that a non-human animal has developed like an actual sort of sense of the divine?
That's a very good question, Ryan. And a very tricky one, so I'm going to point you down in the class. No. No, I think the important thing is this. I speak of self-consciousness because it gives me a clear hint. I would argue that if you're self-conscious, you can actually, you can know God in an unreflected way, but you can then also reflect upon that experience. You have that awe, that radical awe of which Heschel speaks. At the same time, I don't think that it takes necessarily self-consciousness. You could have that if you, in the ontological sense, are a Dasein, of which Heidegger speaks, which is way before self-consciousness. When you are a being in the world that negotiates its being by being in the world, by acting, getting up in the morning, although you know very well that you are not going to survive your life, right? You don't think about that, and yet it is at work every moment that you live. What is the meaning of my life? You don't act self-consciously, though you are a self-conscious being. I think that a being that can do that, even in a pre-self-conscious state, would actually have to have that awe, or could have that awe, let's put it that way. So from that perspective, I would even, and again, here I'm willing to push the envelope further, but I would say that if that ontology would work for a being, for any being, at that moment I would say if that radical awe or that radical amazement is there, then there is the experience of the transcendent, of this ineffable mystery. Now, I wouldn't call it God. The beautiful thing about the Tetragrammaton, you know, the original Hebrew 4 letters for God, is that they're unpronounceable and untranslatable. I like that, because it hints at the ontological nature of the experience of God, and that God is a reflection. The word God is a reflection about something that is a real experience, and we believe to be real. But of course, the moment I call God God, I have reduced God. So I would say it doesn't need language, it doesn't need full self-consciousness, it needs the capacity of being a self in the world. Self-consciousness is always being a self that can reflect upon it, this division.
Thank you very much, both of you. That was really wonderful. the thought that comes to my mind, first of your favorite primate, the look in the eyes of your favorite primate, whom we just saw there, very much reflects that unqualified experience of the divine, that same presence that's not defined, that we're saying we find in the primates or other animals.
And here I was thinking it was me waving behind the camera, but you might be right. No, I'm teasing.
But just, I mean, we find that in children, but I wanted to just share one experience that I had, which was really a profound experience for me. I was driving and I was in Australia, and a kangaroo, a small kangaroo, had been hit. And so I stopped my car and I went and I picked it up in the middle of the street. And it wasn't my car that hit it, but it was like I felt its heart freak out, and it couldn't move very well. And I looked at it, and I looked in its eyes, and it was like I suddenly had, and there was terror, of course, at this person picking it up, putting it in its car to take it to an animal place to help it. But at the same time, I had this incredible experience that the life in that animal, in the kangaroo, was the same life that was in me, looking at it, being afraid of picking it up, at one point, will it kick, and all these things. But it was this amazing connection of that the life force, that it was the same life that was living through that being, that animal, the kangaroo, as was living through me. And we were having this really interesting encounter like that. And it certainly wasn't qualified by one religion or another. It was a very primal sort of experience that the life that was living through the force of nature or the animal or the other, that it was coming out of that creature and me. We were meeting, and it was the same life. It's very interesting.
Thank you. Did you want to say anything to it?
Just briefly, the idea of the significance of species meeting together and the intersection, and if you like, the encounter that if you like, opens up in terms of self-understanding and understanding of other creatures, I think is something that has started to be discussed in the literary world as well as in the theological world, and the philosophical world. So I'm interested in work by authors such as Donna Haraway, for example, who's written a book called When Species Meet, and so there are other. So I would say that those kinds of encounters show up, if you like, the close interpersonal, there is a sense of interpersonal relations going on. You can't just say, this is an object or a mechanism that we're engaging with. There's something else going on, and I think you've picked up that sense of the dynamic interaction that I was trying to suggest as being part of our human history from the very beginning. Now, of course, in some of our history, that interaction has been conflict, and this fear that you picked up in the kangaroo is maybe part of that history of conflict with the human, so on. But those relationships have been navigated and negotiated, and so we have this. I'm not sure if I'd call it co-domestication, but there's a sense of certainly co-evolution with other species. I'm not quite sure whether I would go quite as far as saying that the glimpses that we see of wonder in apes, which I think is real, and in fact I've commented on that exactly the same quotation in a volume that's going to be coming out as a tribute to those admirers of Jane Goodall. It's going to be coming out, edited by Mark Beckhoff. I'm not sure I would go further than that and say, well, this means they have some sense of being, of tools and so on, in the way that was hinted at. Partly because I've also been influenced by anthropologists working on these questions and the question of human distinctiveness. But what I would say is that those encounters, if you like, open up a new world of thinking about both ourselves and other creatures. And I think that then also, again, has significant ethical implications. You felt moved then to take the animal to a shelter and get treatment and so on. That's probably enough.
I was going to give myself the final question too, which was basically about the ethical implications of this liminality that you both kind of adverted to. But I'm also going to cut myself off because we come to the end of time. At the end of the time, right? But I think that is a great question which we could perhaps talk about outside at lunch, which is set up outside to the front of the recital hall. The tables are set up in the rehearsal room, down the hall and to your right, as well as the open classroom next to the foyer. Students in Professor Putz's class, we have the dining room in Nobley Hall set up for your lunch. I don't know what makes you rate. You get a special place. But if you please grab your boxed lunch right outside of the recital hall on your way over there. We will begin our session 4 at 1:30. We would greatly appreciate your promptness, but before we do anything else, we will thank the speakers.